Coming to you from the incomparable Vail, Colorado, this is Fast Tracks. Each week, we check in with a past Vail Symposium speaker for an update. And this week, we're checking in with Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. Welcome, Jeff.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Claire. Thank you for having me.
We're so honored to have you this morning. Now, you are a healer, and you've been a healer your entire life, but that healing has taken different forms. Could you explain or elaborate on that?
Well, I never thought of myself as a healer. For 25 years as an emergency physician, I help people heal their bodies, but I never really thought of myself as a healer. I was just a doctor helping people, heal from their injuries and illnesses. And I had these profound spiritual experiences in the emergency department. Sometimes I would literally see souls leave their bodies when they passed. They would be with me before they left. But I never spoke about them at all. And then a few years ago, when I stopped seeing patients in the emergency department, about 6 months later, I just woke up one day with this realization it was okay to start sharing. And so I started to share some of my spiritual experiences. And then 6 months later, I published my book, and now I do a lot of speaking, as you know, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking at the Vail Symposium about some of these spiritual experiences. And as I was doing this one day, a friend of mine said, "I think you're a healer." And I said, "Oh, no. I'm no healer. I grew up in a Christian tradition." I said, "There's only one healer." And he said, "I think you're wrong." He said, "I disagree. I think you're a healer, and I think you should ask for permission to use the word." So I came home, I changed my clothes, I went out for a run because I get a lot of good downloads when I'm running. And I was out on a run, and I said, "Is it okay to call myself a healer?" And masculine presence came to me and said, and kind of chuckled and said, "Of course, I made you a healer." And I got this download in that moment, and I understood, oh, he's not diminished by my successes. If I'm a really good healer, it doesn't make him less. He's not that insecure. And so I came home that day and I put healer on my business card.
That's fantastic. That's such a great story. I'm glad you brought up the program you did with us. That was in September of 2019. For me, the last year or so, the time has felt really warped. Some things seem a long time ago, but your program actually doesn't seem that long ago to me. And it was actually two programs in one, because one night you presented with your friend and colleague, Jeff Olson, and then the following evening, the two of you hosted a workshop. It was a much smaller audience. I think it was about 25 people. And what I remember really vividly from that evening is as the people arrived, there was a real heaviness and sadness to that room. And I'm not an empath. In fact, I'm more of a skeptic, doubting Thomas. But what I noticed as the evening wore on is that the vibe or the energy in that room changed. And by the end of the evening, as we were saying goodbye to people, it wasn't happy-go-lucky, people chuckling, slapping people on the back, but it had lifted somewhat. The grief had diminished somewhat. And I'm wondering if you noticed that change in energy, and if you know what happened and why.
Yes, I noticed it very much, and I'm accustomed to it because I do a lot of those kind of workshops, and Jeff Olson and I do a lot of those kind of workshops together. In fact, just a few months after we were in Vail, we hosted a cruise out of Miami, a 10-day cruise. We stopped at Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, and we had about 60 people on the cruise. And they gave us a conference room to use as we wished throughout the cruise. And we had a bunch of sessions on board when we were at sea. And we noticed that same thing in that group of people. Most of them had lost a loved one in some way or another. Others were working through other difficult problems. And we had sessions, and we made new friends. We had good experiences. we were going down to one of the sessions, and Jeff Olson was a bit ahead of me, and he came out of the room. It was all alone. We were down there together just getting ready, and he came out of the room. He said, "You need to go in there and spend some time before we start." I said, "Okay." So I went into the room, and at the front of the room, the people had brought small framed pictures of their deceased loved ones, and they had them all up on this little stage thing in the front of the conference room. And as I sat in the room all by myself, I became aware of the presence of all of those deceased loved ones that were there with us. And I said, "What's the message? What do you want me to tell these people?" And they said, "Tell them we're one." So yeah, we had profound experiences on that cruise, and we do things together since. And for your listeners that don't know this already, I met Jeff Olson 24 years ago last month. He was flown to my trauma center after a horrible car crash that took the life of his wife and his 14-month-old son and almost took his life. When I went into the trauma room to see Jeff Olson, he was unconscious, and a bunch of people were providing his care. And standing above the gurney looking down on him was his deceased wife, Tamara. And I experienced her presence. She communicated with me. About a month later, when Jeff had surgeries and was awake enough to talk, we ended up sharing this experience. And that's when he told me that before his body was even extricated from the vehicle, he rose up above the scene of the accident and met Tamara in the air. And she said, "You have to go back and raise our other son," because they had a 7-year-old that was uninjured in the accident. And Jeff and I have been fast friends for 24 years now since then.
That's such an incredible story. And I think it's a story that really helps a lot of people. And, I'm thinking about the past year, and, there's a lot of words you could use to describe it: unprecedented, unusual, for many people, tragic. I felt that people sort of broke one way or another. You had some people that kind of went into hibernation and became fluent in DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Netflix. And then you had the people who became really productive. I mean, Taylor Swift came out with 2 albums last year. I have a feeling I know what camp you fell into, but I'm going to ask, were you in the more hibernation or in the more productive preparation group?
Well, I was pretty discouraged with a few things in that Jeff Olson and I were literally getting on a plane to fly to London to speak in London, and then we were going to hop over to Ireland. We were going to be in Ireland for St. Patrick's Day and the spring equinox. We were going to be speaking, doing ceremony at an ancient stone circle, and a bunch of things. And they literally shut down travel the day after we were going to get on a plane. And so we were glad we didn't go, because we'd have been trapped. And we had to cancel all our major domestic and international speaking engagements, and that was really kind of disheartening. We ended up doing most of them via Zoom, which is fun. It's not as good as being in person, but it's good. And about a month later, on April 20th, I hadn't been on my bicycle for about a year. I was kind of sluggish and lazy and didn't feel like it. And I got up on April 20th, and I got up back on my bike, and I rode my bike and exercised consistently almost every day for several months. I lost a bunch of weight, felt great, and started doing a lot more speaking on Zoom, and also a lot more personal mentoring on Zoom. I do one-on-one mentoring with people. And because of COVID and because of Zoom, I now have clients in 10 countries on 5 continents. And I realized, I don't have to be there in person to connect with somebody. I've had some really wonderful experiences.
Well, it sounds like you were in the productive camp. And there's one other thing I think you need to mention, because you mentioned it to me offline. And that was, I believe you finished another book.
Yeah, I kind of finished 2. I wrote a sequel to Not Yet. My memoir of my spiritual experiences in the emergency department is titled Not Yet. And it's available on Amazon and on my website. And I wrote a sequel to that with a lot more spiritual experiences. And then I just kind of put it on the proverbial shelf, sitting on my computer, and haven't done anything with it for over a year. But what I did do during that year was I wrote my most recent novel. they say, you're a writer, Claire, you know this, they say, write what you know. So my novel, this latest one, is about an emergency physician who starts having these profound spiritual experiences that he can't understand and he can't explain them. He's a very Western-trained, left-brained guy that is committed to evidence-based medicine, and he can't understand these spiritual experiences he's having, but he can't deny he's having them either. And it's a novel about what he does and how he works through it.
And do you have a date? I've actually gone way over my 3 questions, so this will be my last question.
No, you can ask as many as you want.
Do you have an idea about when that will be published?
Well, I just finished a draft of it a few weeks ago, and I've been through it once and edited. And I think I've just about got it to the point where I can send it to my editor, and I'm hoping to have it out in 6 to 12 months, depending on how the edit goes and how much rewriting you have to do.
Well, that's really exciting. So we know you're in the Taylor Swift camp, not in the DoorDash Netflix camp. Dr. Jeff, it's been great talking with you this morning. And for everybody watching who wants to know more about Dr. Jeff, you can visit him at drjeff.com online. Vail Symposium, we are taking a brief hiatus, but we will be back in the middle of May for our first summer season program on May 19th. This one will involve the Constitution, and we've gathered some constitutional scholars to discuss issues with the Constitution and constitutional interpretation. Visit vailsymposium.org for more information, and thank you for joining us on Fast Tracks this morning.